Have you ever laid in bed at night, your eyes heavy, your body exhausted, but your mind refusing to rest? And when morning comes, instead of feeling refreshed, you wake up even more tired than the night before. I remember so clearly just last year, a close friend of mine in New Jersey called me. Her voice was trembling as she said, "I'm afraid to go to bed, because I know a few hours later I'll wake up again, staring at the clock at 2 a.m., then again at 4 a.m., and by morning I feel drained." Her words broke my heart, and not long after, my cousin in Ohio told me almost the very same thing. He said aching legs kept him tossing and turning, his mind wouldn't quiet down, and mornings felt heavier and heavier with each passing day. I believe so many of us know this feeling all too well. We often think poor sleep and constant fatigue are just part of growing older. But I want to ask you, what if they don't have to be? What if there's a simple way to reclaim peaceful nights and wake up with real energy again? There is one small, simple habit that American families have trusted for generations: castor oil. And today, modern science confirms what many have quietly known. When used the right way at night, this humble oil can help calm inflammation, improve circulation, and even support deeper, more restful sleep. In this video, I'll show you exactly how to use castor oil before bedtime, and the surprising benefits it can bring not only for your joints and skin, but also for your immune system, your digestion, and most of all, your peace of mind. But before we begin, I have a heartfelt invitation. If you've ever woken up in the middle of the night wishing for just one full, restful sleep, then right now, take a moment to subscribe to The Elderly Way, because this isn't just another channel, it's a community. A place where we share timeless wisdom, simple habits, and gentle reminders that aging doesn't mean giving up comfort or joy. It means learning how to live these years with health, peace, and purpose. As I started to explore why sleep becomes so fragile with age, I found myself returning to something very familiar. An old memory, a bottle of castor oil in my mother's medicine cabinet. I remember it clearly, that thick, pale yellow oil. As a kid, I hated it. Whenever I had a stomachache, Mom would bring out the spoon. It smelled odd, tasted worse, and I'd do anything to avoid it. But as I got older, I realized she didn't just use it for digestion. On cold evenings, she'd rub it into her knees, place a warm towel over them, and sit quietly by the window. Her eyes would close. Her breathing slowed. She wasn't following a routine. She was simply listening to her body. And I began to think, maybe healing begins in these simple, honest gestures. Modern science now tells us that castor oil contains ricinoleic acid, a natural anti-inflammatory that helps reduce swelling, soothe tissues, and improve circulation. It's also rich in vitamin E and healthy fatty acids that moisturize skin, ease joint stiffness, and support aging connective tissue. So I started using it not out of nostalgia but out of curiosity. A bit of oil on the soles of my feet at night, a warm cloth on sore shoulders, a gentle wrap around my knees. No instructions, just instinct. And something changed. Within 2 weeks, my sleep became more restful. I didn't wake up as often. I stopped feeling like my own body was interrupting my rest. I won't claim it fixed everything, but it reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that my body can still respond if I meet it with care. What struck me most was this. The same oil people used to joke about, used only for laxatives, quietly held a long tradition of thoughtful, patient self-care. The kind we don't hear much about anymore. For me, coming back to castor oil wasn't about reviving an old trick. It was about rediscovering a slower, more mindful way to live, a way to listen, to touch, to trust again that even as we age, small things still matter. Benefit 1: caring for my skin as I age. I don't know about you, but for me, my skin was never something I thought would break my heart. I was never into skincare. When I was younger, I washed my face with warm water, used a plain lotion, and moved on with my day. I rarely looked closely in the mirror. I believed beauty had nothing to do with what shows up on the surface. But then I turned 60, and suddenly my skin didn't feel like mine anymore. I remember it clearly, a winter morning laughing with my granddaughter. I smiled, and my cheeks felt tight, almost like they were being pulled. Later, when I washed my face, I saw small cracks around my mouth. My skin had flaked overnight. It shocked me. I started noticing more. Even though I drank plenty of water, ate my greens, slept well, my skin stayed dry, dull, and sensitive. Looking in the mirror, my face looked tired even when I wasn't. It felt like my skin was giving up before I was. I spoke with my doctor. She explained that as we age, our skin produces less natural oil, collagen weakens, and we lose moisture more easily. I understood, but I still felt sad. It felt like I was slowly losing touch with my own body. Then one day, while cleaning a drawer, I found a bottle of castor oil. Honestly, I was going to throw it out. But then I remembered my mother. Every night, sitting quietly, gently patting oil onto her cheeks with shaky hands. She never called it skincare. She just said, "Your skin needs to be listened to." So I gave it a try. That night I washed my face with warm water. I took a few drops of cold-pressed pure castor oil, rubbed it between my fingers, then gently pressed it onto my cheeks, forehead, chin, avoiding my eyes. No rubbing, just a soft touch, like my mother used to do. It felt sticky at first, but the next morning I touched my face and felt something different. Not soft like silk, but not dry, not tight, just calm. I did it again the next night, and again. After a week, not only did my skin feel less irritated, I felt more at peace, like I was reconnecting with myself. Later, I learned that castor oil contains ricinoleic acid, a powerful anti-inflammatory that locks in deep moisture. It's also rich in vitamin E and linoleic acid, which help restore the skin's barrier, improve elasticity, and soothe dry, aging skin. I don't need to look younger, but I do want to feel at home in my own skin. And this tiny habit, a few drops of oil every night, helps me feel that again. Now, each evening, I still take a few minutes to do it, not because it makes me look good, but because it reminds me I'm still here. I'm still worth caring for. My skin isn't perfect, but it's mine, and it still deserves love no matter how many birthdays have passed. Benefit 2: encouraging hair growth gently and naturally. One thing I never expected about getting older was how hard it would be to lose my hair. When I was younger, I barely thought about it. Hair fell out, so what? It was thick, healthy, I didn't even notice, but somewhere along the way that changed. I started to see more hair in the shower drain, more on the brush, and the hardest part, more of my scalp in the mirror. At some point, I began avoiding bright mirrors altogether. I kept telling myself, it's normal, I'm getting older. But it didn't make it easier, because it didn't just feel like I was losing hair, it felt like I was losing a part of me. Friends said the same. One woman joked, "These days I lose more hair than compliments." We laughed, but we both felt the sting. Then one day I came across a quiet remedy that felt familiar: castor oil. Turns out, many people have used castor oil for hair for years. It's full of omega-9 fatty acids, especially ricinoleic acid, which helps improve blood flow to the scalp. And when circulation improves, even dormant hair follicles can start to wake up. A dermatologist once said it's like watering a plant that's been neglected. The roots are still there, they just need a steady stream of care. So I tried it. I mixed a bit of castor oil with a lighter oil like jojoba because it's quite thick. Once or twice a week, I gently massaged it into my scalp for about 10 minutes before washing. Nothing fancy, no big expectations, and after about 2 months something shifted. Less hair in the brush, fewer strands on the pillow. Little baby hairs started to come in, not many, not fast, but they were mine. And somewhere inside I began to feel different too. I wasn't looking in the mirror to see youth. I was looking to find myself again. My daughter noticed too. She laughed one morning and said, "Mom, I think your hair's thicker than mine now." What mattered most wasn't the number of hairs on my head. It was the feeling that I still had some say in how my body changed. Castor oil didn't bring back my 20s, but it brought back a sense of hope that some things can grow again if we treat them gently enough and give them time. Benefit #3, restoring digestive ease 1 small spoon at a time. When I turned 67, my body began changing in quiet ways. Not dramatic, not sudden, just subtle shifts that piled up. And one of the most stubborn changes was digestion. I used to have a stomach that never gave me trouble. But then simple meals made me feel bloated. Sometimes 3 days would pass with no movement. I'd feel sluggish, foggy, like my whole system was stuck. I tried everything, more fiber, more water, gentle walks. It helped, but never fully. And the worst was at night I'd lie in bed, uncomfortable, turning side to side, or waking at 2 a.m. with that heavy, unsettled feeling. One afternoon I mentioned it to my friend. She's 73 and lives in Massachusetts. She chuckled and said, "My mom used to give me castor oil once a month. I hated the taste, but the next morning my belly felt like a cloud." I laughed too. That's an old wives' tale. But then I got curious. Turns out castor oil isn't just folklore. Science explains that when it reaches the small intestine, your body converts it into ricinoleic acid, a compound that helps gently stimulate the smooth muscle of the gut. It's not like harsh laxatives that cramp your belly or make you dependent. It works with your body's rhythm, not against it. I didn't rush in. I asked my family doctor first. She smiled and said, "If you use it occasionally and in small amounts, it's perfectly fine." So I warmed a small mug of almond milk, stirred in half a teaspoon of cold-pressed castor oil. The taste wasn't great, but I sipped it slowly like a small act of care. And the next morning I felt light, not just physically, mentally too. Since then, I haven't used it regularly. Only when I feel that familiar pressure after a heavy meal during a sedentary week, or when sleep gets disturbed because of digestive discomfort. I even shared it with a group of women from my senior yoga class. One lovely lady, 81, said she no longer wakes at 3 a.m. feeling bloated. "Sleeping through the night," she said, "is the biggest gift I've had in years." For some, castor oil is a relic of the past, but for me, it's a way of saying, I still deserve to feel at ease in my own body. Benefit 4, nurturing restful sleep and quiet nights. Every night when I lay down, if it's not aches that wake me, it's the call of the bathroom again and again. Those broken sleep cycles wear on the spirit more than the body. Some nights I'd lie awake until dawn, so accustomed to my midnight routine. My friend in Arizona, a 70-year-old gentleman, once told me he used to wake up 3 to 4 times each night. "I was like a machine," he said. "Wake, go to the bathroom, going back to bed." Now he gently rubs castor oil on his feet before sleep. His nights are quieter now. He sleeps longer, wakes up refreshed and lighter. To me, castor oil isn't a sedative. It's more like a whisper to the body. Your long day is over. Now rest. I'll rub a bit on my forehead, lower belly, or soles of my feet gently, with care, as though I'm in soft conversation with my own body. Some preliminary research suggests a natural compound in castor oil may help calm the nervous system, preparing the brain for deeper rest. The evidence isn't exhaustive, but trusted experiences like mine and my friends speak volumes. I recall another dear friend, a gentle lady nearby, who applies a warm cloth soaked in castor oil to her lower abdomen each night. She said, "I stopped needing to get up in the middle of the night, and for the first time in years, I woke up feeling truly rested." It's a simple practice, but to her, it felt like reclaiming the basic peace of a whole night's sleep. Of course, if someone has serious sleep issues or frequent nighttime bathroom visits, it's wise to consult a physician. But for many, simply following a quiet ritual, taking slow breaths and feeling the warmth settle in, it's enough to support gentler sleep. Don't let age define how you sleep. You can learn to care for yourself with softness and patience. And bit by bit, reclaim nights that aren't fragmented but restorative. Benefit 5. Easing inflammation, joint pain, and muscle soreness. A warm touch of relief. As we grow older, many of us quietly accept pain as if it's an inevitable side effect of aging. I once thought the same. I used to feel exhausted climbing a few stairs. Stiff shoulders made reaching overhead difficult. A friend in our senior yoga class once said, "Just bending over to pick something feels like a chore." Slowness, fear of pain, it wears your spirit down. Then came castor oil, a gentle, soft reminder of simpler remedies. I learned that it's rich in ricinoleic acid, a compound proven by science to reduce inflammation and soothe pain signals deep within tissues. Unlike ordinary oils that sit on the surface, castor oil penetrates deeply, cooling inflammation, easing swelling, and improving circulation. A 2022 study confirmed castor oil's ability to lower inflammatory markers in the body, something our elders and traditional healers have believed for generations. Here's how I use it. Gently warm a bit of pure castor oil until it's comfortably warm. Massage it lightly into sore spots, knees, shoulders, lower back. Place a soft cloth on top to hold in the warmth and help absorption. Leave it overnight so the oil works quietly throughout the night. It doesn't work miracles overnight, but after a few nights. I noticed in the mornings I moved more easily. Joint stiffness decreased. One retired teacher in Michigan told me, "Putting oil on my knees every night helped me return to my morning walks." A farmer shared, "Since applying it to my back, I can bow easier during morning prayers." These small shifts are monumental to those of us who have lived in pain. I don't claim castor oil cures arthritis or replaces medical treatment. But used wisely, alongside proper care, it brings something invaluable: comfort, control, and the conviction that even with age, we can still live with agency and resilience. Age may bring challenges, but it doesn't demand surrender. A little warm oil, patience, and self-kindness can help you keep walking steadily, gently, always forward. Benefit 6. Boosting immunity and gentle natural detox, nurturing your body's inner flow. As I've aged, I started noticing quiet changes in my body. Colds lasting longer, small cuts taking more time to heal, and recovery after illness becoming noticeably slow. I recall thinking one winter that a common cold felt like wind chill from decades ago. It made me realize how easily we overlook the everyday support our body still needs. I remember elders in our community gently applying castor oil to their belly, over areas rich with lymph nodes, as if performing a quiet ritual of care. Modern science suggests a reason for this. When castor oil is applied over the abdomen or lymph-rich areas, it can gently move lymph fluid through the body's natural detox system, helping infection-battling white blood cells circulate better and boosting the immune response. I tried it after a light cold. I warmed some pure castor oil and placed a warm cloth over my lower abdomen before bed. I left it overnight, and in the morning I felt surprisingly lighter, cozier, and for the first time in days not struggling with lingering cold symptoms. A woman I know in Texas said doing this for a few nights made her feel less bloated, more grounded, and she noticed she caught fewer colds at the senior center. A gentleman friend, accustomed to modern treatments, said once, "Massaging warm oil into my body during cold months makes me feel stronger, like I'm returning to my younger self." Despite harsh weather changes, this isn't a substitute for vaccines or professional medical care, but for those seeking gentle, natural support, like a soft whisper to the immune system, it's worth considering. What I cherish most is the sense of calm that comes from knowing I've cared for my body in a way that feels nurturing and attentive. Age may bring changes, but it doesn't demand surrender. With a little castor oil, patience, and kindness toward myself, I can move through my days with steadiness, peace, and trust in my body's quiet resilience. Extra benefits and important safety notes. Gentle support for the everyday challenges of aging. Beyond its well-known uses like soothing joints, calming the skin, or promoting better sleep, castor oil has many subtle, helpful benefits that often go unnoticed, especially among older adults. Soothing breakouts and irritated skin. Even after middle age, I've had moments when small breakouts returned, usually during the change of seasons. I've dabbed castor oil gently onto red patches or little bumps around my chin. It soothed the area without stinging or drying, unlike many over-the-counter creams, helping minor cuts heal faster. As we age, even small scratches seem to take longer to heal. I once snagged my wrist on a cabinet handle, a small cut, but days later it was still raw. I cleaned it, applied a drop of castor oil, and covered it lightly. Within a week, the skin healed noticeably smoother, and the mark faded quietly. Nourishing lips and sensitive skin. Dry, cracking lips used to be my winter routine, until I tried patting on a little castor oil before bed. The next morning, my lips felt soft again, without the waxy residue lip balms often leave behind. I've also used it on dry elbows or knees, the kind of skin that just needs a little quiet kindness. Simple ways to use it. Mix a few drops with honey and apply it as a hydrating face mask for 10 minutes. Blend it with coconut oil and massage gently into dry areas like hands or feet before bed. Important safety notes. While castor oil is natural, safe use, especially for seniors, requires a bit of thoughtfulness. Always do a patch test. Apply a small drop inside your forearm and wait 24 hours before using more broadly. Older skin tends to be thinner and more sensitive. Choose quality oil. Look for pure, cold-pressed, hexane-free, unscented castor oil. Just like with food or medication, quality truly matters more than any label on the bottle. External vs. Internal use. Castor oil can be safely used on skin, joints, or the scalp. But if considering it as a laxative or internal remedy, always consult your doctor. Misuse can disrupt digestion or create dependency. Special precautions. If you're managing chronic health conditions, are pregnant, or nursing, speak with a healthcare provider before using castor oil in any form. Some studies suggest its effects on muscle movement, peristalsis, and hormones may not be suitable in certain cases. Castor oil may be an old friend, but even old friends deserve respect. When used with care in the right amount and with steady intention, it can become a gentle companion in your personal health journey. And at this stage in life, feeling in control of your body, even in small ways, brings a sense of peace that no product can replace. Castor oil is not just a traditional remedy anymore. It's a global health legacy, a bridge between ancient wisdom and modern science. For many older Americans, it conjures images of a small, familiar bottle tucked away in family medicine cabinets. In Ayurveda, it's woven into centuries of healing tradition, quietly trusted, gently effective. Now, science confirms what our elders intuitively knew: nourishes dry skin, strengthens and slows hair thinning, soothes inflammation and joint aches, supports digestion and restful sleep, bolsters immunity and deeper balance. Castor oil isn't a cure-all, nor does it replace medical care. But as a nightly ritual, it's a small act of self-kindness. A few drops before bedtime and you're softening tired skin, smoothing sore joints, whispering to your body, "Tonight you rest." This isn't about chasing youth. It's about reclaiming comfort, dignity, and quiet vitality that doesn't fade with time. Here's a heartfelt reminder. You've spent years caring for others, often setting your needs aside. It's time your body felt loved again. A simple, consistent ritual each night just for you. Start today. Try this for 7 nights in a row. Notice how your skin softens, your sleep deepens, how much lighter you feel each morning. Share your experience with loved ones or leave a comment below. Your story could light someone else's way. If you're looking for more gentle, natural wellness tips for seniors, hit that subscribe button on the Elderly Way. Together, we're building healthy, kind habits, one drop, one evening at a time.